Did you ever wonder? I do. Did you ever wonder why the sun always rises, but the stars never fall? Why dry land is never satisfied by water? And why fire never says enough?
The wonder of becoming yourself. Or are you ready to become who you are, as they said in the trailer of the Robin Hood movie? But fascinatingly, in the book of Genesis, chapter 12, then you look at the very first verse. The Jews have a fascinating take on that, which is spectacular in my opinion. And when you look at this in Hebrew, you see something that maybe you've never seen before. It says in English, if you read that verse, it says, Now the Lord had said unto Abram, Get thee out of thy country and from thy kindred and away from thy father's house and unto the land that I will show you, or show thee. The Jews point out, and very accurately, that when you look at the Hebrew script on that it says Lech Lech. In other words, it's a lamed and a hoof. And the idea of that is aspire to desire. In other words, you are raised to what it is that you really want, to become what you really know you want to be. And so, you're asked from the time you're a little kid, what do you want to be what do you want to be when you grow up? Well, what's your aspiration and what is your desire? And so that lek, of course, is translated here in English as, because they're just taking the word from. And so they're taking the lek in English and just saying go out from. But that isn't even close to what the words actually, in fact, they don't even, interestingly, in the Strong's Concordance, they don't actually even translate the lamed hoof. They just say, and anytime you say this, you just go, what? Not available. What do you mean not available? So that's one way to do it. But when Rashi, he unpacks this in his commentary, he goes into a lot of what the Talmud says, and he's the one that says, and clearly it's something to ponder, that will you come unto yourself? And it all matches up very largely in their mathematical way of looking at things with the idea of Abraham was 100 when he had Isaac, which was really his potential. And so interesting, when you do the numerology on Lech Lech, it equals 100. And so what that idea is there is that Abraham's potential was 10 times 10, which is 100. And that idea of 100 actually be the letter kuf, not the letter hoof, but that was how I found this particular thing that I began to study and fall into it and go, oh, isn't that fascinating? That Abraham's name would be to become a father. And isn't this interesting that in order for him to become and have the potential to become who he was, he had to have this son in the promised land, so to speak, rather than where his father would be raised him at. And interestingly, that he would be separated from the world to an extent as he moved away from what it was that his father's house was and became a place where God would show him. Don't miss that part of the verse. It's absolutely beautiful. So what I understand as I began to just really pray through this verse and ask God to show me what he really was meaning here is that in order for you to really to aspire your desire, God is going to have to show you. That's what's exactly that God told Abram. He told him, leave your father, your kindred, and your land behind you. And that your land is like your territory, where you think it is. And let me take you where you need to go. And then let me show you what it is you really want. And I don't know about you. I don't know if you're at that point in your life where God has taken you someplace where you had no idea where you were going. And then he began to show you what you really wanted. And my story is clearly that way. In other words, I was in the car business. That was my father's house. That was my father's land. That was his territory. He did it all his life, and to the end, he loved it, okay? And so I grew up in that, and I stayed in it for literally 40 years till God finally pulled me out of it and of some real shenanigans that were involved in that. But then he called me to do the Christian Car Guy show. In other words, he showed me what it was I really wanted, which what I really wanted scared me to death. I didn't aspire to be on the radio as I was, but when God called me to it and I began to walk in that calling that he gave me, I began to realize the rejoicing of my heart that this podcast is actually just a fruit thereof, of just loving to express the light that God has shown me through his word, and being able to do that every week. I do it all the time, and then I get to highlight other people that do that, or see how God walks with all these things. It's just like, oh my goodness. I had no idea, that night as I was praying that God would show me what I really wanted to be when I grew up. And I love that idea of growing up because it has just everything to do with the letter Lamed, right? And Lamed has to do with your heart. It's the first letter in the word heart. And if you look at it, it's got this, it's the highest letter. In other words, it's the letter that goes above the line, and it points to God. And so it's the idea of aspiring and the Lamed are very much connected. The idea of desiring is that letter goes, is the hoof, is the crown, right? And that idea of bringing the light down into the world, and that whole idea of desire is a really cool, thing. And when you look at the two letters, the letter hoof comes before the letter Lamed, and that letter hoof is the number 20, and the letter Lamed is the number 30, and so it very clearly is 50 when you add the two together and you take the four, you take that times 2. In other words, Lech Lech would then equal 100, okay? And so connected to his name, connected to his potential, and certainly connected to leaving, his father's house, so to speak, and coming into the promised land. All things to ponder as you can ponder your own story and how God will show you, obviously, or maybe not so obviously, God will show you what it is you aspire to desire.
Do you ever wonder? Did you ever wonder? I do.